actually going a bit early, and it's a Thursday afternoon. Mirko, how are you, my friend?
It's not early. It's 6 p.m. Thursday night. And here we are. We're recording weekly wrap, and I wish we were recording live tomorrow, but unfortunately, it hasn't been a good week. That we actually are attending a couple of funerals tomorrow
Yeah,
of dear clients, which is no good.
yeah, we are, and to the respective families, our thoughts and prayers and our love go to you. Yeah, look, it just unfortunately the full circle of life, Mirko, and this is what happens. And yeah, I guess the nice thing there from that point of view is both people didn't get to suffer too much, which was nice. But unfortunately, the shock of it all is always not great either.
No, the morning starts and difficult times, and yeah, wishing those families all the best and all the strength they can to get through this.
Absolutely, absolutely, and more importantly, we'll be standing with them every step of the way. So that's the most important part. So, mate, if we can get into the markets, it's been a topsy-turvy week this week. We've seen ups, downs, we've seen it all over the place, and in fairness, it's been down quite a bit up until today here in Australia. So, you want to give us a quick overview?
Yeah, look, it certainly has been a topsy-turvy week, and I've been trying to get my head around that. And over the last couple of weeks, you would have heard us talking about, potentially a bit of a rotation out of the tech sector and into more sort of defensive stocks, and people asking the question, and the words like bubble have been thrown around. Is AI a bubble? Do we legitimately believe in what's going on? And so the market's been really waiting to try and decipher this, and they decided in their wisdom that they would wait to see what Nvidia has to say for itself by way of its reporting. And so Nvidia reported in the US after the close last night. So they actually waited till after the close, and they had a really successful quarter again. Now, some of these numbers are pretty extraordinary, Luke. I believe that the quarterly revenue figure was $57 billion for the quarter ending September. The market was forecasting that would be 54 billion. And so the market is now happy. The market is happy that they've overshot the expectations. And my question is, so what if it was 45 billion? Is that like a really bad outcome but the market has become that fickle, and off the back of that today, we've actually seen a rise in the All Ords of in the order of 1.29% for the day. So it was a big day, which sees us after a couple of red days. We had a -2% in there as well. So we're only down 0.6 for a week for the first 4 days of trading in Australia. So just really goes to show how how fickle that market's become, and to be waiting on the dot point of a company and determining whether it made 50 billion or 54 billion or 57 billion. It's quite interesting that that's the case, but that's certainly where we find ourselves. So like I said, this announcement came from the US after close last night, so I suspect that tomorrow trading in the US will be very strong, and we should see that come through overnight.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, exploring that Nvidia number, just to give you some further context there. So $57 billion in revenue and $31.9 billion in profit. So that's a profit margin of 56%. So that is just an extraordinary sum. And if you think about it, year on year, their sales are up 60% from that point of view. And I think there's a lot of discussions around, is the AI phenomenon real from that point of view, and is it a bubble and all that kind of stuff. And from mine, Mirko, just looking at the data and looking at what's coming out, I think we need to be really careful between companies that actually produce things and companies that actually dream about things. And in the AI space, it is both. And at the moment, what we've seen the tide rise, and obviously the companies that produce things are doing really well, like an Nvidia, and it's reflected in their share price. But then there are companies that aren't producing anything but have an idea or have a concept, and their valuations are just as lofty. So I think we are seeing a two-speed AI revolution.
Would
you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that, Luke. You can't sort of punish companies that are actually genuinely delivering bulk revenue and bulk profits and the like versus companies that actually don't have any revenue, or they have so little revenue and they've got so much cash burn that you really can't compare the two. But that's what the market seems to be doing. The only question that is certainly in my mind around the AI side, and we're starting to see a bit of talk about this now, is that there is a bit of circular money that goes around in the AI world, and Nvidia invests money into a data center, for example, or a company like, and in return that company then goes and buys, their GPU chips, for example, right? Yep. So there is a bit of circular cash that goes around, but the reality is they're the number one supplier in the market, But they're always looking over their shoulder and looking for someone coming through the ranks, someone that maybe does things quicker, faster. Their streaks ahead, but unless they continue to innovate, the valuations will come into question. And the minute question marks start coming up about future revenues and forecast revenues, that's when the valuations start getting questioned. So as it stands today, no one questions valuations, and unless we start getting signs that the revenues may be starting to wane a little bit. But look, I think that from a portfolio perspective, we've been keeping an eye on this for the last 12 months, and whilst we still have exposure to that sort of area and that specific sector, we are a little bit underweight there, and happy to do so, and happy to have some other defensive companies that throw out significant revenues as well, but not necessarily in that space.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's worth mentioning as well is our focus on quality. So, the focus has very much been on the companies where there is a proven cash flow, there is a proven business structure, there's product being sold rather than just a dream itself. I think at the moment in time, with valuations becoming lofty, the scary thing is, and I think, just listening to you speak before, what happens if it was 45 billion, which is still an extraordinary result. But at 45 billion, Nvidia share price gets hurt. And then these companies where it's just on a dream, they get smashed. So that's the challenge. And I think now at this particular moment in time, companies like Nvidia, the AI boom, as we're seeing it from that point of view, being very, very clear about your exposure to quality, and being very clear about, well, how much do you want to have in that space, given the amount of run you've had with that, which has been pretty extraordinary, I dare say.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
All right. Well, the other thing I probably want to have a quick chat about today is I want to talk about the Liberal Party matter.
I have to laugh the minute you mention it. I'm laughing already.
I need to talk about the Liberal Party because this week alone, it's 1 week, yeah. But this week alone, we've had Susan Ley, the federal opposition leader, holding on by her nails to the top job, and having to have a couple moment where she's pretty much had to swallow her pride and sit back and go, well, the climate wars are now on again, net zero is off the table, and we're pretty much thrown everything out the window from a Liberal perspective. So she's done that, and she's held on to her job. Had she not done that, she would have been replaced. So that's that issue. In Victoria, we've seen Brad Batten. He was the opposition leader, came in, I think, in January this year, and he's now been replaced by Jess Wilson. To be honest with you, I don't know Jess Wilson. I believe she's 35. She's a young mum. This is the first term in Parliament. From that point of view, she's clearly very, very good at what she does from that perspective. But they've gone and replaced Brad from that point with somebody like Jess, and you kind of go, okay, cool. And in late breaking news, we've just had New South Wales, where Mark Speakman, the leader of the Liberal opposition, has now resigned, and he's been replaced by the first-term member for Vaucluse, Kelly Sloan. I've got to give the Libs credit because I admire the aspiration, I admire the ambition, but when does it stop? And when do we start looking at self and start focusing on the people that actually matter, i.e. the voters? Because I think the Liberals have lost their compass on that basis.
There just seems to be a hell of a lot of what's in it for me ego going on in that party, and unfortunately, what it results in is lack of opposition, lack of ideas, lack of accountability. And if I was the Labor Party today, I would just be slightly chuckling. You can just imagine the discussions that they're having, going, "How good is this?"
Yeah, look, I must admit, and I also think about Victoria as well. And look, I can't say that Brad Batten was doing a good job or a bad job. The fact that he wasn't in the press just tells you how indifferent we have become in Victoria with our opposition anyway. But the fact that he was actually put up there because he had a background in crime and policing and stuff like that, given the problems that we're facing in Victoria, and given that's one of the major issues, you would have thought that he was cherry ripe for the role. So replacing him on a whim, you just kind of go like, yeah, look, I hope it works because Victoria desperately needs an opposition and we desperately need a change of government. But whilst you're focusing on self, it's pretty hard to vote for a rebel.
Come on, Luke. Haven't you heard the rhetoric? Look, Victoria is one of the safest places on earth, unless your door's getting kicked in at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, thank God for those machete bins. I feel so much safer. Yeah, look, the world is a crazy place, mate. And look, to our beloved Liberal people out there, please, for a moment, stop focusing on self and start focusing on the people who will elect you. You do that, I promise you, you're going to be half a chance. Not hard, but hey, look, we can only hope. Now, it wouldn't be a week if we didn't talk about Donald Trump. All right. And it's fair to say that November's been pretty tough on Mr. Trump with a lot of things. And it looks like that the insulting machine that Trump usually goes with and hurling insults and coming up with trendy nicknames, that seems to be backfiring badly on him. It also seems to be that he's bullying and his strong arm tactics. If we think about the Epstein files and all that kind of stuff and where he was standing pretty firm and all that kind of stuff, he pretty much folded like a deck of cards when he realized he was going to lose that one. And now he's trying to change the whole narrative by saying that he's instructed them to release the data, which, given what he's been doing over the last 3 months, you'd argue it was a contrary. And I guess the final bit there is that every distraction that he's tried to do, Venezuela, we're going to go attack and do whatever we're going to do, and we're going to build this massive ballroom and all these weird and wonderful things. It seems like people are now finally starting to check out Donald Trump. Are we at the end, or are people just tired? What do you think?
Look, there's no question that all of the playbook that was being used previously that you discussed there is not having the success that it was 12 months ago. And you can call reporters no good and piggy and whatever it is that you decide this week to call people, but at the end of the day, that can only take you so far. And I think that people are now starting to say, well, actually, let's have a look at the substance and let's have a look at some real accountability, and I hope we start seeing a little bit more of that, because it's not just the US, the world that desperately needs that. We just need some real stability, honestly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And look, to both reporters out there, and I'm glad you raised that. To both reporters out there, and they were both females in that regard, not that it matters that they were female or male, regardless of who it was, they were doing their job. They were holding a person to account and asking fair and reasonable questions. They weren't being rude. They weren't being disrespectful. They weren't being anything. And the questions they were asking were valid questions. And Trump, as is typical with Trump, the minute he gets challenged, the minute he gets cornered, he diverts, he distracts, he attacks, and he doesn't respond to the questions from that point of view. And I do think Joe Public is starting to tire of all the shenanigans. I think it was funny initially. I think it was entertaining. It was different. It was I'm cleaning the swamp and I'm doing whatever. But I think everyone's just kind of looking at it now going, if that was my daughter, I'd probably go up to him and thump him.
Yeah, I'd say that's very much the case, and people in the US are not immune to the issues around inflation, economic growth, employment, and that's going to become the real issue now, right? Is the quality of life better than it was 12 months ago? That's what people are going to start asking themselves, and you better have the right answer for them, because it's the votes and the numbers that matter in the end for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do think the biggest challenge for the Democrats in the United States at this particular moment in time is not to get sucked into that vortex of Epstein. At the end of the day, I think it's going to be bad on all people who are involved, regardless of whether or not you're Democrat or Republican. So ignore that. But I do think if they focus on things like cost of living and affordability and so on, there is no question that, the policies, the tariff initiatives introduced by Trump are not having their intended effect. That they are causing prices to rise. And the reality is, like even on the weekend, as we just saw, Trump had to do a reverse on the beef exports from Australia. So Australia now is exporting beef minus any tariffs. So what a bonanza for Australia. This is fantastic. And it's just the stupidity of it, because it just proved everything that he said to be incorrect.
Thank you, Americans. Keep eating those burgers, because we're happy to supply you with the beef.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, one thing I do, and probably the last thing I want to have a chat about, this week in the Age, there was a cracking article that appeared early on in the week, and it was talking about how Australia is overgoverned, overtaxed, and overcomplicated, and how Australia was set up to fail. And there was probably 5 key points that came in that article, and clearly we haven't got time to go through those 5 key points, but what it was saying is that at the moment, Australia collects over $1 trillion of tax revenue, and yet we have nothing to show for it by truth. What it also showed was that there was fragmented responsibilities. And what that meant was that with the federal and the state governments and the local governments having multiple departments, all of the same thing, like if you think about all the health departments, if you think about all the education departments and all that kind of stuff, it creates an environment for buck passing and shortages and bottlenecks, and we just can't seem to move forward. And we're seeing that from a productivity perspective, there's a handbrake there. What we're also seeing is that from a revenue perspective, Canberra collects 75% of the revenue, yet the states are delivering over half the public services. So there's an imbalance. So Canberra's collecting the stuff, and yet the states are spending it, which kind of doesn't make sense in terms of the way it works. And I guess what we've seen as a general rule is that there's this red tape thing everywhere. Now, that article highlighted a lot of the problems that you and I and the rest of us on this medium have spoken about. Do you see any chance of these things being corrected and improved by our current governments, or do you just think it's all too bloody hard and we're just going to see more of the same BS moving forwards?
Yeah, look, I'm sort of torn between two thoughts on this. I do think that a lot of what's been mentioned there is prevalent around the world as well. Like just doing business in general has become difficult, but I do think that in Australia we have, because maybe it's because of the confusion between the federal and the states. We have layer upon layer of bureaucracy to deal with, and it's just become so difficult. And if I look, within our own industry, and you look at all the changes that we've had over time, there's legislation that was proposed 2 years ago that still hasn't passed. It still hasn't resulted. So, how do businesses make decisions? How do businesses make decisions about investment, about employing people? And these are the things that at some point in time, if you make it very difficult to do business, people will either not do it or do it elsewhere. And that's the biggest concern.
Yeah. Look, I think you're right there, mate. I think the thing that probably plays in the back of my mind, we're a population of 26, 27 million people. We've got 3 levels of government that dominate in terms of dominate the way we behave, the way we act, and the way we interact from that point of view. And I can't say that we're fundamentally better off as a result of it. So it does feel like that we've got too many hands in pockets. We've got too many people coming up with great ideas and making these wonderful virtuous statements, but we've got nothing to show for it. I think we're putrid at execution. Like if we executed like the government, for God's sake, we'd be in jail.
Oh yeah. Weekly wrap coming to you during our behind bars.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'd be in Ghislaine Maxwell's prison rather than someone else's, because she seems to be given the easy one from that perspective, but we'll leave that alone. But like I said, I just kind of sit here and I look at all these things, and I think these articles are really great because it's really good to turn the mirror and have a look at yourself and go, bang, yeah, that's true, that's true, that's true. But I think my worry with all these articles is that it's not the first time we've seen an article like this. We tend to see an article like this every 3 months. We tend to talk about it every 3 months, yet nothing seems to happen. And I don't know. I don't know if it's because part of the reason I think, and I could be wrong on this, but part of the reason is because we built the country in reverse, because it was the states that were discovered first, and then we built the federation after. So New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and then Western Australia, and then they all agreed to create the federation back in 1901. So that's how we were built. And I think what we need to do is probably have a look at that document that we've built and gone, okay, that was suitable maybe for then, but now in 2025, maybe it's not that suitable moving forwards.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, there was an article, I think it was this week in the Fin Review, and if you recall, we had that economic roundtable, and that was back in August last year that we had that, and there were a whole heap of measures, and we're going to do this and do that. You know what's happened? Nothing. And that's the point. It's like, we have these roundtables, we have these commissions, we have these reports commissioned. And all that happens is a whole heap of, hot air and fluff. And in the end, we don't actually get anything done. And we're still in the same spot. That's the problem.
It does feel like an episode of Utopia as in a recurring episode. It just doesn't stop. And I always have that vision of Rob Stitch going, really? Really? It's just kind of bizarre.
For those of you that haven't watched Utopia, it's actually worth a watch. It's on. You can see it on ABC iView, and it is hilarious. And I agree with you, Luke. I must admit, I sometimes actually feel that I'm looking for the cameras to sort of say, "Am I actually in an episode of Utopia?"
Yeah, no, it does feel like that. And I must admit, there are times when I actually turn off Utopia because I actually start to have like post-traumatic stress because I'm kind of going, surely to God, this can't be right. All right, mate, what have you got planned? I know tomorrow's going to be a tough day in terms of what we're doing from that perspective. What have you got planned for the weekend thereafter? You got some good things to do, or what's going on in your
life? I need to decide whether I'll work Saturday or Sunday, Luke. I catch up on the enormous amount of work that is required. I haven't looked too far beyond the weekend, to be honest. No idea what the weather looks like or anything.
Yeah, no, look, I actually must admit I haven't looked too much at all, but one thing I will say, I'm reading a cracking book at the moment. I don't know if our clients have read this book, but it's called The Chairman's Lounge by Joe Aston. So it talks about Qantas, its behaviour during COVID, with a particular focus on Alan Joyce, one of my favourite little leprechauns. If you want to read a book to understand how corporate culture and how you can trash a brand, it is a fascinating read. And I think it would question your loyalty in relation to Qantas, given the way they treated you, particularly in relation to flight credits. If you remember, we had that very issue in this office where we had a number of flights booked, COVID hit, and Qantas took it upon themselves to keep that money and not actually give it back for a very long time.
Well, thanks very much, Luke. You've ensured that I can't get into the US, and now I'm certainly not going to get an invite to the Chairman's Lounge.
I can assure you won't be after the read, mate. I can assure you.
Perfect.
All right, mate. Well, look, thank you for joining me on a Thursday. Not something we do very often, so it was nice, and it is sunny out there. So to all our wonderful clients, hopefully you managed to get out there in the sun today. Enjoy the weekend. Not sure what the weather is, but make sure you have a good time. Just be safe on the roads as always. And to our team, thank you as always. And until next week, take care, and we'll chat then. Cheers, guys.
See you guys.